Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Americans for Prosperity Tennessee Town Hall with our guest, Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, as he breaks down his plan for the citizens of Knox County and takes your questions live. For those in Zoom, please remember a portion of this meeting will be broadcast live, and for those watching on the various social media platforms, click the link below to join us in Zoom so you can ask your questions. And now, Americans for Prosperity, Tennessee State Director, Tori Venable.
I want to pass it over back to Grant Henry, who's going to be our moderator, to introduce the Knoxville Mayor, Glenn Jacobs.
Thank you so much, Tori. And let me say, keeping people safe while getting back to work. That's the theme for today, if you will. The theme is to begin a dialogue, to start a conversation around finding the best, most effective solutions to keeping people safe while we get back to work. Now, assumptions espoused in an environment of rapid change, they can prove very costly. So I would implore our audience tonight to keep an open mind as we discuss how government can work alongside public health officials and businesses to tackle this crisis in a way that protects public health and allows businesses to innovate in order to safely serve their communities. Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us this evening, sir. How are you doing on your end?
Thanks, Grant. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well, sir. Doing well. And let me just jump straight into it here. It seems like Governor Lee has made a concerted effort to localize these solutions as much as possible, to make sure that needs are addressed at a community level first through that community's activists and that community's leaders. Could you talk a little bit about what your interactions with Governor Lee have looked like over the past few months and how he actually approached you to come up with a plan for a strategic, phased reopening of businesses?
Sure. Governor Lee and his team talk with us pretty regularly, at least once a week. Sometimes, actually, now it's daily, as we're looking at moving more into focusing on rebooting the economy. Governor Lee and I have a good relationship on a personal level as well. So a while back, I guess a few weeks ago, he was on a call with the mayors of the big four counties and municipalities and just asked for ideas and what we thought a phased reopening might look like. And more than happy to give him our thoughts based a lot on what the Knox County Health Department, who has done a very good job in this situation, what they had prescribed all along and what their thoughts and concerns were. We also worked with Representative Jason Zachary and Congressman Tim Burchett to get retailers. We had a conference call with the big retailers as well as the Tennessee Retail Association folks to see what they were doing and ideas that they would have. And I think it's important for everybody to realize, sometimes we hear this idea of profits over people and businesses are just, being dangerous. Well, that's not how the businesses look at it, because they have to have employees and workers who feel that they're in a comfortable, safe environment to do their job. And they don't want to harm their customers. And they also want their customers to feel comfortable, because let's face it, if you walk in, say now, into a whatever business and they're not doing at least common sense things, you're not going to stay there very long. And that's where the market plays into all this. Is it actually is going to force businesses to adapt to what is a changed environment at this point. But we talked with all those people and tried to put bullet points and kind of a comprehensive plan, as of course what everybody should be doing, using information for the health department, and then some industry specific things, and sent that off to Governor Lee. And he's worked with the other mayors around the state. Tennessee we're a little bit of a hybrid, because you have a state Department of Health, and then some of the counties have their own health departments, and six of us, basically the six big ones, have our own health department. So what Governor Lee has done is working through the state health department. He issues directives through that way, but then we have some latitude in what we do within our local areas.
Hmm. And it seems that a terribly restricting and arguably somewhat misleading narrative is starting to present itself during this crisis. That narrative being that Tennesseans have a choice between one of only two options here: essential and non-essential businesses.
Yeah.
It's a false choice between everything must shut down or everything must open with business as usual. How have you tried to navigate those waters between the two extremes?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of problems with government in general telling business what to do. And this idea, essential and non-essential businesses, I mean, that's somewhat subjective. That's really politicians and bureaucrats making those decisions. And I think that the people that own the business, the people that work for the business, they're all essential for them. And certainly if you want that product, they are essential. So that's something it's really started getting thrown around there, and I was like, this is confusing, and again, it's somewhat subjective. And then you see people, why is this business still open? Because they don't do anything important. Well, they actually do something very important in the minds of maybe some other folks. And it was, for me, it was kind of disheartening to see that, and to see people going, oh, these people shouldn't be open and these people should. And it's like, just let the market figure it out. Okay. And also there is this narrative, well, you either have to, it's shut down, or we're all putting public health at huge risk. And I don't think that either of those are correct. Again, when we look at businesses, even without any impetus from government, they were still doing things so that people would be safe and feel safe in their shops. And that's the way the market works. I mean, even before, and Tennessee hasn't gone nearly as far as some other states have gone in mandating what folks can do. I think we should all keep that in mind as well. When I look at like California or Michigan, what's happened here in Tennessee is nowhere nearly as intrusive as those states. But even before whatever orders came down from the governor, you had businesses that were almost desperately trying, like the gym that I go to. The gentleman that owns the gym is an RN, and he has a background in infectious disease. And it was almost like they were desperately doing everything that they could as far as, they're cleanest gym in town anyway, I think. But I mean, they had upped their sanitation schedule. When you walked in, they were right there, and they literally gave you a hand sanitizer. And the first thing you did when you walked in the gym was put on the hand sanitizer. They had shut down every other machine so that people weren't on top of each other. They were limiting the amount of people in the gym. You could only work out for 45 minutes because they wanted everybody to get a chance to come through without getting the gym too crowded. They were tracking the people in there, and they had people going around and sanitizing all the equipment. Every time someone used it. And it wasn't, a lot of gyms, you see the signs of clean off the equipment after you get done. Well, it was mandatory in that case. If you didn't, they were going to kick you out. So the businesses were, they're making an effort to ensure the public safety as well. And I think that we all have to keep that in mind. And sometimes there's this narrative that, businesses can force people to buy stuff from them. That's not true. Businesses have to attract business. They have to attract customers. So they want to present the safest environment that they possibly can, because they want people to come back. And then also when we look at just the overall thing of, is it the people, is it the economy? Lives versus economy. I would say that lives and the economy in many cases, are almost the same thing. And when we look at the economic damage that's been done, it's tremendous. And we think about the people that are unemployed. Knox County, it was in the national media that we had a big surge in our suicide rate. I can also tell you that now we've seen a significant increase year over year in the rates of overdose deaths. So, all those things really combine. When we're looking at the economic picture, it's not just as easy as saying, well, if we shut everything down, everything's going to be okay. And that's just not the case. And also, what's the exit plan? I mean,
right.
not sustainable. You have to come out of it at some point. I mean, the left kind of thinks that, the government can just give everybody money, it's going to be fine. Well, an economy is not based on consumption. It's actually based on production. And if you don't have people producing and making things, um, you're in deep trouble. And that's one of my major concerns when we think about things like the food supply chain. It's very fragile. And now what we're seeing is because restaurants certainly aren't doing anywhere near the volume of business that they normally would, farmers are destroying their crops because there's no demand. And we see the same thing with the price of oil. It's great that gasoline is so inexpensive. The problem with that is it's not going to be profitable for companies to pull the oil out of the ground. So what they'll do is they'll start cutting production, which of course means that at some point we'll have shortages. So it's not as easy as just saying, the economy is more important. This is more important. We really do need to figure out a way to deal with COVID-19 while at the same time ensuring that the economy stays relatively intact.
And let me get to some of the specifics then of your plan. And I noticed the governor released a plan as well today, which is quite similar to at least portions of your plan. One quick note to the Facebook audience as well. If you were so happen to join us on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us along in Facebook. You are definitely going to want to pay attention to that link to the Zoom right in the description section of this video. Our question and answer period starting at the bottom of this hour will be Zoom specific there. So definitely jump over during the 5:30, 6:30 Eastern time portion to get questions to Mayor Jacobs. And Knox County Mayor Jacobs, let me ask about some of the specifics here as it pertains to your plan. Let's start with restaurants. We can get into retail or something. But as far as pertains to restaurants, of course, curbside and delivery options will continue. But how soon do you think people will be able to go eat inside their favorite restaurants again? And what does that experience practically look like?
I don't know. I think a lot of things are going to change. Governor Lee announced yesterday that with the state health departments that they're going to start allowing restaurants to operate within in dining in restaurant dining at 50%. In Knox County, we're originally the governor had said until May 1st. The proposal that I sent the governor was actually, we worked on that with the city of Knoxville, and then of course the health department who actually has the ultimate authority in this situation, to come up with a fleshed out plan. And so we're still going to wait till May 1st in Knox County. But as far as what it's going to look like in the restaurant, it won't be nearly as crowded as they used to be, because initially it's going to be 50% capacity. Lots of room around the tables, only a limited number of people at each table. I know a lot of restaurants, the servers will be wearing masks or gloves or whatever, and of course the customers are free to do that as well, and probably encouraged in many cases to do that. So it'll be a little different. When we look at restaurants that serve alcohol, the bars are still going to be closed for probably a significant amount of time. And the reason for that is because people just tend to congregate at bars and stand or sit in close proximity to each other for a long period of time. And the health department wants to discourage that. So, and also things like no live music for, again, probably an extended period of time, because again, the whole thing is about trying to keep the number of people in an enclosed space limited, and with as much space between folks as possible. And then hopefully as things go forward, there's metrics that the health department is looking at with the spread of COVID-19. I think that one thing that's important to realize is the number of cases it's going to keep going up. Especially as people get out and are around one another. I think the most important two metrics are the number of hospitalizations and, of course, the numbers of death. The most important thing that we should have from the beginning. I have some issues with how this whole thing was handled, just bigger picture at a national level. From the beginning, I think that we should have really focused and isolated the vulnerable populations, older folks. If this thing gets into, say, a long-term care facility, that's disastrous. That's when you start seeing dozens of deaths. In Knox County, when we look at our statistics, if people that are over 75 that get this thing, they have a 15 to 20% chance of dying. And if you're the younger you are, the less that's the case. That goes down significantly, for folks that are under 60 or whatever. But in any case, that's what we really have to concentrate on, in my mind, is ensuring that the vulnerable population is as protected as possible.
Hmm.
But we do have to realize that the number of cases are going to go up. But I also think that now that they've developed antibody tests and are doing more of that sort of testing, they're going to find that this thing's probably been around for longer than we think it has, and it's probably infected a lot more people than we think that it has, which is good and bad news, because I think we'll find the mortality rate among younger folks is much lower than was initially thought. But it also means that it has been around. So, my plan didn't include any metrics because I'm a politician. I don't know how to look at those metrics and say, if it does this, and our health department realizes that too. So they're not so much concerned with the number of cases. Of course, if you see a huge spike, that's an issue. They're much more concerned with the hospitalizations and the deaths and making sure that it's not spreading among the vulnerable population.
Hmm. And you spoke to this a little bit already, but I do think it's a very important point to stress as we're going through some of the particulars of your plan, whether we're talking about restaurants and what that capacity looks like at half starting first, or whether we're talking about somehow scaling what Home Depot, Walmart, or Target, or some of these larger retail stores are doing, talking about scaling that down to these smaller mom and pop retail
Yeah.
stores. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. You spoke on your weekly update on April 17th. You said the following, quote, "Be wary of plans that micromanage the economy. Guidelines and recommended best practices are one thing. Central planning is quite another." Could you expand a little bit on that? The
Sure.
difference between guidelines and central planning?
Sure. What we're talking about, and I've been extremely impressed by by the work of our health department. They've been working with businesses, to develop what the best practices look like and how to implement those. And that's part of what they see their role is to actually help businesses and educate them and say, this is what you need to do to try to keep people safe. And businesses will hopefully do that. And I think that the way things look right now, again, it's in a business's best interest to do that, because if they don't and people feel that their health is being threatened, they're out of there and they ain't going to come back, and they're going to tell all their friends, and their friends ain't going to go there. So, I think there's going to be a huge market impetus, incentive for businesses to make sure that they're doing what is necessary to the greatest extent possible ensure public health and public safety. On the other hand, when we start getting into politicians saying, well, I think we should do this, and I think we should do that, and I think we should do this, and actually saying what can happen and who can do what and all these different things, I'm extremely uncomfortable with that, because politics starts coming into play. As you said, this is the hardest. This is the hardest on the working poor and small business. The big companies have the capital and the revenue because they're everywhere, that they can weather the storm. Mom and pop places can't. And the last thing we want to do is burden them even more with onerous regulations that they can't comply with. So that's another thing that we're really trying to do, is keep in mind that every business has to be able to do these things, right?
Hmm.
But politicians shouldn't be there deciding who should open when. I mean, we can look at public safety, public health and data and say, okay, that's kind of one thing. But when the politicians get in there and start making decisions, that's something completely different. So with public health in mind, okay, we need to do certain things, but we shouldn't be doing those because of political purposes. And we should ensure that whatever regulations are put out, they apply evenly to everyone, and they're inexpensive enough and not so onerous that people and businesses can't do that.
And we're again, if you're just joining us on the Facebook live stream or in Zoom here, we're joined right now by Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. If you're in the Facebook live stream, you definitely want to check at the top of the description of that Facebook live stream. stream, there's a link to the Zoom meeting that is happening at the bottom of this hour. We will actually be transferring to that Zoom exclusively for the question and answer period. So you definitely want to join over there or get that exclusive content for us, with us rather. But Mayor Jacobs, let me put you on the spot a little bit here and ask a question that has been asked of me several times that I know a lot of people are wondering. In both your plan and the governor's plan, I believe it's been suggested that going forward, if there's a reintroduction of this in the fall, or if we see something happen again, those that may test positive, those employees that may test positive, there will be a 14-day quarantine period. Do you have any information as to what that looks like? Is that employer enforced? And if so, is there some type of allowance for the employers to make this happen? Could those employees potentially lose their jobs? I realize it's a difficult question to answer, but
Right.
is there any information there?
Um, Currently, again, the public health director has very broad powers in a public health emergency, and they do have the power. Excuse me, they do have the power to forcibly quarantine someone. And we almost had an incident like that. It was luckily it didn't happen because it was actually a bit of a misunderstanding. But they can issue a warrant to have someone isolated and quarantined, and that's a power that goes way back and has been around for a while. And that's probably what I mean. That's just how it is. As far as how it looks like on our side, on the official side, again, businesses are going to have to be able to adapt to this. I would hope that they wouldn't fire people, that they would at least give them unpaid time off, hopefully paid time off. But again, you have to realize that for some businesses, that's just not feasible.
Right.
So, and this is all unprecedented. I mean, we're in uncharted territory. Right. A lot of this stuff is things we're gonna have to figure out as we go along, unfortunately.
Well, in that vein, Mayor Jacobs, you and I have known each other for at least a little while, and you know that I'm a very strong believer in the proper application of constitutional scrutiny. If the government wants to intrude on our freedoms, it must have an extremely valid reason. Yeah. Now, protecting our health during a pandemic is certainly a valid reason, but government must clearly define the scope and length of that intrusion, as far as I'm concerned. So, almost in vain of the last question I asked, aside from a phased reopening of business, what does the proper role of government look like during this period? How do you ride that line of protecting civil liberties while also deciding what is the appropriate time for government to intervene?
Well, as I said earlier, I've had issues with just how all of this has been handled, really,
Parlors,
kind of
no,
at a national level and moving.
And by the way, I want them to open. Oh, excuse me. I want them to open, and I want them to open.
Getting into some very gray area, and again, I have some constitutional qualms about that. One of my fears is eventually, whatever happens with COVID-19 happens, and we'll get past this. What happens when the next really bad thing happens?
Right.
What happens during the next pandemic? I mean, people are like, well, it's the Spanish flu. I was like, no. In 1957, you had H2N2 influenza. It was a pandemic. It killed 116,000 Americans. If you were extrapolating that to now, our population numbers now, that'd have been 250,000 people. And I mean, they didn't do what we've done now, because if they did, I don't know what our country would look at. We've had swine flu, we've had mad cow disease, all these different things, SARS, all of this stuff. So it's going to happen again. And what happens? And when government is able to do what we've seen government do right now, and in many cases exercise extra constitutional authority, that is extremely troubling. I think I forget, and I'm sure you saw the quote, and you can remind me of who it was. Might have been the governor of Maryland. They had, well, is this constitutional? Is this violate the Bill of Rights? Well, that's above my pay grade, dude. You swore an oath to protect that document. So if it's above your pay grade, you need to resign, because if you don't know what you're talking about, you need to hit the road. And that's something that's really bothered me, is you see a lot of elected officials, and I often wonder how many of them have actually read any of the documents that they swear an oath to defend. I don't think they have.
And Mayor Jacobs, again, we
Sorry,
definitely
my dog's in the background. My dog's in the background facing a squirrel.
He's just saying he was getting as excited as you were, Mayor Jacob. That's all it was. He's a constitutional dog, if there ever was one. That's for sure.
Right.
We would definitely
and also, and Grant, I think there was a way to do this that didn't threaten the Bill of Rights. I mean, because we have. I mean, we look at the First Amendment and freedom of religion, and here in Tennessee, again, we haven't gone nearly as far as many states have. I mean, we've just said this is what we would like everybody to do, especially when it goes to church, and most churches have done that. We look at freedom of assembly. When you're saying that only so many people can gather, well, that becomes an issue, especially if people gather to protest the order that you said that only so many people can gather. You look at the Fourth Amendment. The reason that we have the right to travel is it's implicit in the Fourth Amendment, that it says with the unreasonable searches and seizures, which means you can't be stopped for arbitrary reasons. Well, now we have an arbitrary reason that people can be stopped, which impedes your ability to travel, which is in a way a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Then we look at some places around the country where mayors especially have done things like issue executive orders. And one of the things within the executive order will be the prohibition of sale or transport of firearms. Well, now you have a Second Amendment issue. So there was a way, and I think that a lot of folks just took the easy way out and said, this is what we're going to do, and it doesn't violate anything, and if you have a problem, you can sue us later. That's not how it should happen.
Well, and we want to be respectful of Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs' time here. So those that are watching on Facebook right now, I'm actually going to be transitioning in just a moment here, giving David time to transition on the production and back in here, transitioning into the Zoom meeting for the specific question and answer section. You definitely want to click that Zoom meeting link right at the top of the Facebook chat here at the Facebook description. Just go over there, join us in the Zoom meeting. On the way out, though, Mayor Jacobs, could you tell our folks that are watching right now about story time with Mayor Jacobs, what you're doing with Reed City USA, the Instagram account and stuff?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for mentioning that. Before all this happened, we had started a program actually last year called Reed City USA. And you can go to readcityusa.com and participate if you live in Knox County. That'd be great. But it's trying to promote reading, especially early childhood and especially among families. With school being out now, of course, that was one of the main vehicles that we were using. And with that being out, we're still trying to get people to read, especially our younger folks. So 4 or 5 times a week, we have a segment where I read a kid's book, and it's called Storytime with the Mayor. It's a lot of fun, and I have become very well versed in children's books.
And as we're transitioning over here to the Q&A section that's specific, I do want to thank everyone that's joining us right now. 40 folks that you can see right now. Honestly, our fantastic team here at Americans for Prosperity Tennessee, Tori Venable, State Director, James Amundsen, our Deputy Director, and our grassroots team here with myself, David Thompson, and Josh Frampton. Some of the best people I've ever had the pleasure of working for in my entire life, and they've just really rooted this thing into me. All of the grassroots is what it is. It's how you get stuff done. It's the lifeblood of politics, not just in Tennessee, but everywhere around. And Mayor Jacobs, as we're into this question and answer section, we're going to be watching the chat. Guys on the team, let me know what you